Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to welcome you to what I think is probably a very, very unique philatelic event, and that is a joint meeting of 5 philatelic organizations. The Collectors Club, we're based in New York, the British Empire Study Group, the Cape and Natal Study Circle, the South African Collector Society, and the South African Philatelic Club. And next in the agenda, I'd like to hand matters over to Tony Johnson of the South African Collectors Club to take over from me.
Good morning, America.
Yeah, Tony Halgrave Graham is going to do the introduction on behalf of our society.
I say good morning, America, something like a rather good old program, or good afternoon to all of us over this side of the pond. I'm Tony Halgrave Graham and chair of the South African Collectors Society. I'd like to thank the Collectors Club of New York very sincerely and much for their efforts in putting this all together. The last program I saw of theirs was poor Eddie Bridges giving a talk. He was a very important member of the society and we miss him badly. In fact, a lot of his material was sold this morning at Spink at way over estimates. The South African Collectors Society was developed in the 50s from a dealer's letter. Eric Sherwood wrote a newsletter every month, and that developed into a fairly major worldwide society. We got up to about 180 members at one stage, but we're now, like most societies, down to 120. We're active and cater for all levels of collecting, mainly Union, but also Southwest Africa and Republic of South Africa currently. Tony Johnson, who is looking at me right now, is editor for the Springbok, which is the South African Collector Society magazine, and has won many awards, is available hard or electronic. We have many meetings, including one rather like this, where we have a weekend conference where all South African societies have a joint meeting. And we're always extremely pleased to welcome new members if anyone is out there and wishes to join. Tony Solomon, who was going to do the Cape and Natal Society, has asked me just to mention that as well, because he's in Australia and maybe 3:30 in England or 10:30 with you, but it's 3:30 in the morning and he needs his beauty sleep. The Cape and Natal Society started life in 1998, just as the Natal and Zululand Society. Then the Cape got added to it, and the number of members then decreased to about 40 in 2017. But as our speaker mentioned earlier, it bounced back up to 80 from 2017 to now, so it's doubled. And that's largely because Simon Solomon produces the most excellent electronic magazine and sends his greetings, and I think is attending the next meeting. But membership is free, so join up. It's a very high-class organization.
British Empire Study Group lives with the Collectors Club. We use their facilities. I have a co-chair, Robert Gray, who will be with us at the 5:30 meeting. We are basically meet every Thursday. British Empire, very loose. If it even went through the British Empire on an airplane, you're welcome. So we're not very strict about what really qualifies as British Empire. We just liked to get together. We have great meals. When pre-COVID, we would have themed meals, and we just have a lot of fun, talk about our material, and do a deep dive. So Jamie, do you want to say a little bit?
I'll just say I'm standing in for for Steve, who seems to be lost on the highway somewhere. He started the club about a year ago, so we're the new boys on the block. And it was just started to keep a few South African philatelists together during COVID, and it's grown and it's grown. I joined him a few weeks after he started. I think I put the first exhibit up, and then we had other exhibits coming in, and then Keith came in with his, and then Joan saw it and liked it, and it's just exploded to today. It's all a bit of a, as I said, explosion. I can't believe what's happened from just the two of us just talking a year ago, and today we're here in the middle of New York.
Keith Klugman belongs to particularly, of course, the Natal and Cape Philatelic Society, but also the SACS, and he is an absolute top-class philatelist and postal historian with a past history of having collected elsewhere, which always makes, I think, people more interesting than if they've just been stuck in one trough all the time. He has now thankfully settled his interests on Natal and has developed what is, I think, undoubtedly the finest collection of Victorian Natal in the world. He makes new and has made a lot of new discoveries. He's meticulously documented them. He writes articles, including one for the London Philatelist last year, which won him the RSPSL Tackling Award. He's been a fellow of the Royal since 2010, and we really are very much looking forward to his talk. He very kindly did a talk to the South African collectors earlier this year, and that was very much appreciated and went down very well. So if he does half as well here, we're all going to be in for a very happy and entertaining afternoon.
Right, well, thank you very much. So it's a great pleasure to have an opportunity to address you all. Natal, of course, is is very dear to my heart, but I recognize we've got a broad variety of folk here, and so I'm going to talk about Victorian Natal, basically from the very first letters which exist in private hands. I'll give you a little history and start off with geography and history then. So geography, and I realize for some of you this is redundant, but Natal used to be a British colony. The history I'll go into in a minute. But essentially, it's a particularly interesting area to collect because of its proximity to lots of other places that started issuing stamps later. So you'll see it's in what is today South Africa, used to be a British colony, and right adjacent between two Boer republics, the Transvaal and the Free State, and sort of blocking their access to the sea. And that is part of the history which we will get into. So the background then is why Natal. Natal actually means birth in Portuguese, and the reason it's called Natal is because a famous Portuguese voyager, Vasco da Gama, who was really the first European to set sight on Natal, saw it on Christmas Day in 1497 and named the land Natal because it was Christmas Day. That's the Portuguese word for Christmas. It was never settled for more than 300 years thereafter by any Europeans, when a handful of individuals, British actually, settled at what became the port of Durban. What's important and where the postal history starts is about 20 years later, when the Zulu king, who had lived there all his life, and they were the dominant community, actually massacred an expedition of Boer settlers who were trying to negotiate rights to live there. And virtually the entire European population of Natal fled the country in 1838. So there was no one literate basically in the entire country after 1838 for a few months. And then there was a Boer Republic set up, which only lasted to 1842 because the British basically then took it over. And I'll show you the only letter known from that rather short campaign, lasted about a week. The end of the story then is that Natal became part of the Cape Colony in 1844, but in 1856 it became its own separate crown colony in 1856, and that meant they needed stamps. So the first Natal stamps were issued the following year, 1857. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through everything that's on this slide, but suffice it to say, there was an enormous interest and a lot of influential people, all highlighted in yellow here, particularly in the UK. So members of the Royal, presidents of the Royal, treasurers of the Royal, had major Natal collections before the Second World War. And then a few things happened that a couple of major Natal collections, in fact, one from Eric Mann, was donated to the Royal during the war or just immediately after the war. And then another major collection of Natal was donated to the Durban Museum. So there has not really been a major exhibited collection of Natal since the 1950s. Between 1950 and 1990, there were two large collections put together, and Bill Hart may be well known to some of the folk on the call, major collector of Natal, but his collection was sold at Cavendish in the 1990s. And then Benny Illman, who's a famous South African collector, also put together a fantastic collection of Natal, but again, never exhibited, and sold off eventually through Argyle Etkin. And most of the material in those two sales eventually came to me. So many of the major items of Natal were sitting in other collections. So if you wanted the great military mail of Natal, the rarest soldiers' letters, they were all sitting in the Saturn collection, which was a great collection of military mail. If you wanted the best Natal specimens, they were all sitting in Samuel's collection. I'll talk at the end about the link between the New Republic, short-lived Boer Republic stamps only valid for use in that republic. So they either have the stamps of Natal or the Transvaal for onward transmission. If you wanted a Natal New Republic cover, you couldn't find one because the best were all in the Yonkers collection of New Republic, and so on. So things have changed, and we now have a much greater interest in postal history than they had before the Second World War. But this just highlights some of the collectors. Okay, so what is the earliest postal artifact that we have from Natal in private hands? Now, I mentioned the massacre in 1838 by Dingaan. Prior to that time, remarkably, and to an audience which may be predominantly American today, it was a handful of American missionaries who were the only literate people inside the interior of Natal. I remember I mentioned there were some British folk who had settled around Durban, but the interior was entirely controlled by the Zulu king Dingaan. And there were, believe it or not, 3 intrepid American missionaries who settled in the interior. Now, their letters all exist, but are held by the missionary societies. There's, in fact, a book written of the letters of one of the missionaries. In fact, the husband of Sarah Champion, but seemed the missionary society not that interested in the letters of the wives of the missionaries. So this is the earliest recorded letter from Natal in private hands, written in 1836. It's headed at the top here, if you can see it, in 2 words, Zulu land. But because there's a book which tells us, in fact, where they were, Sarah Champion and her husband, we know it was, in fact, written just outside of Durban, where they were living. The second postal history item here is a fascinating item that I only recently acquired. It's a letter that I won't go through all the details. It was forwarded twice, first from the US, through the UK, through London, and then to this marking here is a Cape Town marking. And it was sent up privately on a ship via Port Elizabeth to the addressee Newton Adams. So Newton Adams was MD, he was a doctor, and he was the second of the 3 missionaries. The only mail service that existed in the interior was basically missionary mail between the missionaries. And there's one letter known, and this is it. So he received this letter, which was in fact a report on from the Missionary Society, and he forwarded it to Alexander E. Wilson, MD, who was at Dingaan's Kraal. So these guys were quite far apart from each other, but he must have got a messenger to send it. So this letter actually traveled by missionary mail to the 3rd of the 3 missionaries. And this was in fact 1837, and the massacre occurred the following year. And they all fled, all the missionaries, as I said, everybody fled. So for early letters of Natal, I'm afraid there's nothing much earlier than this. So, you know, there really was nobody literate, as I said earlier than that. I mentioned then that after the massacre, and I can't go through all the history, there was a major battle at which the Boers defeated the Zulus called the Battle of Blood River. And there was a Boer Republic set up. But now that there was actually a possibility of an independent republic on the borders of the Cape Colony, a decision was made to annex this area to the Cape. And there was a military campaign. It's a battle for Durban in 1842. This is an officer's letter written in Durban. And I won't again have time to go into the details. Very fascinating. He's asking if he can be loaned some money because he might be promoted. And if you were in the British Army at that stage, you had to pay for your own uniform. So it actually turns out he wasn't promoted because everything's online these days. And I found that he was then sent to India and he was still a captain a few years later. But anyway, that was his letter. So the early postal history, I'm not going to have a chance to say much more. I've shown you just 3 items, but if you do collect Natal, the greatest postal history item pre-stamp is this marking, the Post Office Ladysmith. There were only 3 post offices that had postal markings. We're talking now before the Natal became an independent colony, and the post offices were Pietermaritzburg, the capital, Durban, the port, and then this internal town, Ladysmith. And the post office Ladysmith is known in only 4 examples. And this prepaid marking also exists at the 3 towns. And there are only 2 examples of the Ladysmith prepaid. You can see they're in the same fugitive ink. There is one other cover, but it's in the Hearst collection in the Durban Museum. So that's one of the sort of gems of my collection, the Post Office Ladysmith. Now, I'm going to say something about the next set of stamps because they're very primitive stamps. The early stamps of Natal are, in my view, great primitives. There's obviously some other very famous primitive stamps, you know, from places like Jamaica and so on. But these primitive stamps were locally produced, and they simply embossed bits of colored paper. And I'll show you a picture of what it looked like in a minute. There were 4 stamps, threepence was the local rate of postage. So if you wanted a double rate postage, you could pay sixpence, or triple would be ninepence. There was also a shilling. They were made locally in the capital, Pietermaritzburg. Unfortunately, an unscrupulous postmaster, and we think we know today who he was, in the 1890s, there was so much demand for these stamps from collectors that he actually found a supply of the original paper. And he had access, in fact, to the original dies. This is a real problem because he created reprints. And so the only way that you know that an embossed Natal stamp is genuine is if it's used, and used with a postmark that's identifiable as used on the stamps in the period they were used, which was 1857 to 1861. So although occasionally you'll see a mint stamp, and one or two have gone for enormous sums of money, virtually nobody, in fact, nobody can honestly say that a stamp is genuine, because it was the same paper and the same dies that were used to make the reprints. So no unused embossed stamps are therefore included in major Natal collections. This is what they looked like. The embossing, if you could see it, it says Natal, Victoria, Regina is the VR, a crown, and then the value. And I've already been through this, so I'm not going to repeat it, but just to say the postal rates are pretty simple. It was 3 pennies for a local letter, but they did have also an unusual charge, perhaps, which is if you wanted to send one of these embossed stamps to pay postage abroad, you basically couldn't, because they were only valid in Natal, but you had to pay an extra 3 pennies as a port charge. So if you mailed it from the port in Durban to the UK or whatever, you had to pay the threepence port charge. If you mailed it from the interior of the country, you had to pay sixpence, which was threepence local postage plus the threepence port charge. So I hope that's clear. And I'm going to move now on to a picture of perhaps the greatest Natal embossed stamp. It's not actually one stamp, it's 2 stamps. And hopefully, if you can look clearly enough, you can see that where my pointer is saying that says 3 and then pence, and there's a crown here, and the word Natal is at the top. But on the other side of this bit of pink paper is another stamp pointing in the other direction. And that's what we call Tate Bache. So that there's 2 stamps here. This is a pair of stamps, and they're facing in opposite directions. The Tate Bache is only recognized on the threepence, so that's the lowest of the 3 values. This is the only one recorded on cover. It is cancelled by a cross. The reason is there were only 3 post offices that had cancellers, and so this came from another smaller town. It's addressed to the very Reverend the Dean of Pietermaritzburg, who was the Bishop of Pietermaritzburg. It's a well-known correspondence. And for those of you who've been paying attention, the fact that it has 2 stamps on it means it was a double rate cover. This is a local cover, and so it has sixpence value because it's a pair of stamps. Now, these Tate Bache threepence are extraordinarily rare. There are 7 known. We know where all of them are. It's been written up in a number of articles, and I thought I'll just share some of the others with you. This is in the Taplin collection. So the cancel here is different without a cross. This is the Durban cancel. It just says Natal at the bottom. It has the date. You can see DE for December. And on the top stamp, you can see a 1. So this is in the British Library in the Taplin collection. There is one with an oval Pietermaritzburg cancel. This is the only one with that cancel. This is actually also in my collection. And then Her Majesty the Queen happens to have one as well. So this is in the Royal collection, which previously was in the Ferrari sale in the early 20s. The last 3 that exist, so we've seen the one on cover, we just saw 3, these are the last 3. They have a 1 cancel, which came on later. The stamps were reissued for a shortage of the threepence stamp in 1861. I'm not going to go into the details. This is in a museum. The right-hand one did sell on auction a while ago. I didn't need all three in private hands for my collection. And this is in fact in the Mann collection at the Royal. So in terms of special embossed stamps, the Tate Bache is right up there. There was a very short period I mentioned where they ran out of the subsequent stamp, which we'll see in a minute, which was the threepence shell on head. And so these embossed stamps were brought back and they were used bisected. But this one top left was in the Burris sale. I don't know who owns it. If anybody listening owns it, let me know. I'm certainly interested. But this is what you'd like to see in a bisect, cancelled over the bisect. Now, all of these are used in August, July, August, and September 1861. In the Tapling collection, which I mentioned is the British Museum, there is this item. It's used from Umzinto. That's actually a 7 cancel. Again, not optimal because it's not tying it over the bisect, but this is what exists. This one, by the way, the Burris one is the only one known on a full letter that is tied over the bisect. This is in the Royals collection, in their forgery collection. I'm not 100% sure it is actually a forgery because it was used exactly the right time, August 1861. The correct rate was in fact threepence. So there's one cover known with this is a 4, by the way, for Umhlali, which is the town. By now, 1861, these towns did have numbered cancellors. But unfortunately, the cancel ties the stamp but doesn't tie the bisect. So it's down as a forgery. There are a couple of these bisects on smaller pieces. This is perhaps the most desirable one. It's actually illustrated in the Robson Lowe Encyclopedia. It's in my collection, and it does have a Pietermaritzburg cancel next to the one. So it's almost certainly genuine, but it's not on a full cover. Now, before we leave the embossed issues, I'm just going to show you a couple of the most interesting embossed stamps. All of these are extraordinarily rare if you get beyond just a threepence or a single sixpence. This is a 9p rate, so this is a threepence stamp on the left. The sixpence is green. And this is a military letter, and at first glance, you might think, oh, this is awful. Some idiot has gone and written all over the stamps, which detracts. But in fact, it's not true, because what's written here is patrol after Bushmen. This is a military letter. It was mailed out in the middle of nowhere, and it was mailed to another military person, and it entered into the mails in Pietermaritzburg. There's actually a very faint cross underneath here. So the person who put it decided to send it off to the post office, actually wrote patrol after Bushmen, cancelled the stamps. They were then cancelled at the post office in transit. And so that's an extraordinary sort of interesting early use. Now, if it's been frustrating you so far that you actually can't see what's on these stamps, you can just see little bits of colored paper. There are very, very few that are in any shape. This is probably the best example of an embossed stamp on cover. It is a sixpence, which was the right rate from Pietermaritzburg, threepence to the port plus the threepence port charge. You can see I'm tracing it out now, the outline of the stamp. And if you look closely, that does say it's on its side, SIX pence. So this is a really beautiful example. For the purist, again, it's not tied, but at that stage, they used to hit the stamps often in the middle. But again, part of a very well-known correspondence to Thomas McClear, who was the head of the Royal Observatory in Cape Town. So you've seen the threepence and the sixpence. What about the 9p and the shilling? These are the high values. The 9p, there are only 3 items on cover. And 2 of them are here. The bottom one here is a registered rate from Durban. It's hard to see. It is cancelled by a Durban circular cancel here, but blue on blue doesn't show. This is in the Mann collection at the Royal. This is the only known pair of the 9p stamp. It's on a large part of a parcel, which is in my collection. And then this is specially Oh, I'll come to it in a minute. I'll show you the third ninepence in a minute. The top value, the shilling, there are 11 known now on letter. One of them hasn't been seen since the 1930s. The rest of them, a little embarrassed to say, are all now in my collection. But the top values, there are 2 known with 2 stamps. And so this is a quadruple rate registered. So there was 2 and 6 required for payment in England. But this, you would need 6pence, as I mentioned, to get from Pietermaritzburg with the port charge, 3pence internal and then 3pence port charge. So 2 shillings is a quadruple rate, and then an extra 6pence for registration. There was no Natal registered marking. These are both London registered markings. And then to finish on the embossed, there's one more picture to go, but here is 2 embossed. This is just the 3pence rate. So this is an 8 times the local rate. It's addressed to John Goodrick, who is a well-known lawyer in Durban. And I think a lot of the material, the highest values, are on letters to Goodrick. Here is another one. This is the one that's specially for Keith Harmer, who I can see. And Keith told me how this came out of the Weinberger sale. And you see this rather prominent crease here. It was actually, according to Keith, and he can talk to us about it later, it was folded 3 times. And he described to me how he was amazed when all he could see was this on a little bit of paper. And then he was able to fold it out. And this gives the provenance. It has the cancel there, and it's a deed to Goodrick. And this is the 3rd example of the 9 penny. This is an extraordinary franking. It's 19 times the 3pence rate. What's interesting is that these stamps are actually hinged to the cover. There is a 19 underneath it. I actually think whoever took them off to examine them, and I've got a certificate saying the stamps are genuine, but it worries me that this post office is upside down compared to that post office. So I think it's not entirely possible that this set of the block of 4, by the way, it's the only known block of 4 of any embossed stamp of Natal, any value. This is, if you want a block of 4, I'm afraid this is the block. It does have a crease through it, but it's tied to the 9pence. I think this whole thing probably was 180 degrees, but most of us believe that it did belong to this original, but it was taken off at some stage and then rehinged. Okay, so they talk about the sublime to the ridiculous. This is probably from the ridiculous to the sublime. So from these awful stamps, almost impossible to see, the next stamp that was issued in Natal is this absolutely glorious shell on head, is well known to most collectors of British Empire. In my view, arguably one of the most beautiful stamps ever produced. There are 3 values. Why I'm showing 4 die proofs here is actually quite interesting. If you look at the picture of the very young Queen Elizabeth, the shell on head, there is a circle around her which is clear on the 1 penny and clear on the 6pence. And so these are the final die proofs, but on both of the 3pence, you'll see that the oval has not been cleared. These are progressive die proofs. And if you look more carefully, and I've blown it up on the left here in the top, in all 4 corners, but I've just blown up the top left corner, there's a circle and then there are 4 dots around it. And there's no line between the dots. Whereas in this one on the right-hand side, there's the dot, and then they have joined up the dots. And in fact, later on, the lines were made clearer. So there are 2 different varieties of the 3pence die proof. And this, to my knowledge, is the only set of all 4. These are Perkins-Bacon die proofs, which many of you will know are far rarer than the die proofs of De La Rue, who took over the printing. So this was on the invite, and it's a story that I would like to tell, because this, again, the picture here comes from Jaffe. Jaffe wrote this, had the best collection in the world. I won't have time to go into Cancelled by Perkins-Bacon, the scandal and all the story, but essentially for Natal, there are 2 stamps known each in a block of 6 originally with this cancelled cancellation. The sixpence is not catalogued in Stanley Gibbons because there are only 2 examples, one in the Royal Collection and one in the Mann Collection, so there are none in private hands. Again, if a threepence blue with the cancelled came up, it would be something that would be extraordinarily desirable. But in the Jaffe book, all you would see was the top 3 stamps. So the left one is in the Royal Collection, the right one is at the Royal Philatelic Society in London, so both in London. And the one in the middle here was in the private domain. It was in the Hart sale that I talked about at the beginning. And that sale in 1990, the stamp disappeared anyway, from my view. I didn't know who had it. So George Holschauer, who may be well known to many of you, called me up in South Africa 25 years ago from California and said, Keith, do you have a cancelled Natal stamp? And I was pretty sure that he'd acquired this Hart stamp. So I said, no. And he said, well, I've got one for you. And of course, I couldn't argue. And I bought it. But having the Jaffe book, I was able to show that, in fact, it was this stamp because it lines up perfectly. So there's the pair. Subsequently, in fact, just last year, on Corin Filler came up, the Natal stamp was in the Besançon sale, which is a fabulous collection still being sold various countries. And Besançon had some incredible Natal. So I'm now happy to have been able to reunite these 2 stamps. It's the only pair, in fact, they're the only cancelled by Perkin Bacon of Natal known, and they happen to be, well, not known, the only ones in private hands, and they happen to make a nice vertical pair. This was also in the Besançon sale. I spent 25 years waiting for this cover. Why special? Well, if you go into Stanley Gibbons and look at the listing of Natal, you can read this at the bottom. It says Stanley Gibbons number 10A is only known from a cover of 1867 franked with 2 such pairs comprising a block of 4. Well, what are the 2 such pairs? If you look carefully, this is imperf between. So this is the perforated 14 first stamp of Natal. We saw the first stamp of Natal from produced in the UK. So it's the Chalon head. And if you want a vertical imperf between of the stamp SG10A, you have to own this cover. Again, Besançon had it. And I was only able to acquire it about 1.5 years ago. So a long wait for this. The tailors knew where it was, and they used to torment me by saying, we know where that cover is, but we know he's not going to sell it. So they were right, and poor old Besançon had to die for me to get his block of 4. Now, there was a period after the Chalon stamps came, there only was a penny and a threepence, and they ran out. They weren't particularly good at ordering stamps from the UK in time, and the penny ran out. You haven't seen the penny yet. I might have a penny to illustrate for you. Well, we have seen the penny. It was a penny red. You saw it on the pair. So they then produced another embossed stamp, which hadn't been part of the original series, the penny rate. And it's, again, you can't see much on it, but it's a little blue bit of paper. And these 3 are the earliest recorded date, which is the 6th of September, 1859. Penny rate was essentially for newspapers that were sent overseas. If you sent a newspaper within Natal, it was free. But if you wanted to send a Natal newspaper to London, you had to pay a penny. And of course, the other great use of pennies, which is the next picture, is soldiers' letters. And I alluded to the fact that how hard it was to find these soldiers' letters. So there are only 4 known with the blue penny. And this is in the Hearst collection, which, as I mentioned, is in the Durban Museum. This is in the Mann collection, which is at the Royal. And then Saturn had a fabulous collection, and I bought that from his sale. And then out of the blue in the US about 15 years ago, this came up. I think it was actually a Cherry Stone sale in New York, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So there are 4 examples. There was another, 2 years later, 1859, they produced that blue penny. 1861, another shortage of the penny, and this time they reprinted it in this rose colored. So this is now the last of the embossed stamps, even rarer. There are about 20 of the blue on various newspapers. There's only one of these recorded on a newspaper, and this is it, from a famous collection of manuscript cancels, the T.V. Roberts collection. And just to finish on the embossed stamps which were produced for the shortage, this is a remarkable item. Unfortunately, not in my collection. In fact, it wasn't. It says here ex-Man. It wasn't actually in Man's collection. Never owned it during his life. The collection was donated in 1951 to the Royal, and this came up, as you can see, on a sale in 1961. At some stage, I'll find out how the Royal actually acquired it. It's possible that Man's sons bought it and donated it. When you look at the Man collection, the Royal is just stuck on a page. There's no notation because, you know, he beautifully wrote up all of his material, but this was added to the Royal collection. It's just on a piece, and it makes up the threepence rate with. It's the only known combination of Chalon with embossed stamps. Finishing the embossed, this last one. This is an extraordinary piece. It's a picture of it here from an article in 1910, and this is. Again, a huge franking with a string of pennies, and these are threepence. And unfortunately, somewhere after 1910, the stamp lover picture, someone decided that they'd do better selling off the individual penny embossed stamps. So we have this picture, and I've put a blue circle around this stamp, which happens to be that stamp. So I was able to reunite one of the stamps with the original cover, but there are another 4 of them that are still missing. So whenever I see an embossed penny, I compare it to this picture to see if it's one of the missing stamps. Okay, we're going to move along a little more quickly now because we're coming to time. On the border of Natal, there was an area that was called East Griqualand, no postal service whatsoever. But you know, anybody in the US knows how attractive it is to look for postmaster provisional or provisional stamps. This was a provisional stamp produced to send mail from this East Griqualand via Natal. There are no covers known. There's one sheet known, and there's this pair of Natal Chalon stamps, which has a marking. It's an oval mark of Goodliff, Smart and Balance, who are the company that made the stamps. But that's as close as we get to an actual cover, and these are called the Mount Currie Express sheet. Now I'll move a little quickly, but initially there were only pennies and threepence, and that wasn't great if you wanted to send a letter like this, which was a triple weight letter via Mauritius and Marseille. So when the Australians joined later, this is very well known. You could pay extra. The usual rate of postage was $1. If you wanted your letter, which has gone through across to Alexandria to Suez, and then is in the Mediterranean, if you wanted to speed it up rather than the ship going around Spain and Portugal, it could go via Marseille and go by mail across, which saved you about 2 weeks. You had to pay $1.04, and this is a triple weight. So this is a 4 shilling letter, and the highest rate, stamp denomination was threepence. So you need a lot of them. If you want a single rate shilling and 4p cover from Natal, there are only, unfortunately, 2 that exist, and they're both illustrated there. And this is just a little bit later, 6p stamp was issued. This is again a triple rate, triple shilling rate. This didn't go via Marseille, it's going via Cape Town. Why I'm showing it is it has an extra 6p, and this is the earliest Natal registered marking, and it was used in Durban and Pietermaritzburg. This is the only one known from Pietermaritzburg. It's different to the Durban Council. We then get into this really interesting story, which I did give a whole presentation to the club a while ago. So I'm going to go through it in great detail, but this was Man's major contribution. The stamps I've shown you, these Chalon stamps, just had Natal and the value, and they didn't have postage. And so what happened was that the post office, in order to keep their accounts separate from revenue, the stamps could be used for postage or revenue. So they were overprinted locally with the word postage. And there are 5 different types, and they're all described here. I'm not going to go through the details, but this is the way it's laid out on the sheet. So type 1 at the top, type 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, the greatest rarities are what we call setenant, because theoretically then you could have a stamp, you could have a pair with a type 1 and a type 2, or a type 2 and a type 3. And there's a horizontal switch here. This 0 we now know is a type 2. So you could get a 2, 3, 3. They're incredibly rare, and I'm going to show you pictures of the couple that are known. The other thing that's very rare of this issue, 1869, with these local overprints are the shillings. So these are sort of royalty of Natal, the mint shillings overprinted with the 1869 overprint. Why they're so rare is because there's, as I mentioned, 5 different overprints. So, so for instance, this is type 1, and it's a 12 3/4 millimeter length of the overprint. And how many exist? Well, 2 exist in private hands, both ex-Ferrari. That's the one in my collection. I don't know where the other one is. This is another one of those, but now instead of the overprint being 12 3/4, it's a longer overprint. Long story here. This is the only copy that has come on the market. George Holschauer had it as well, tried to sell it to me for many years. I said, don't worry, George, I'll wait until you find one that doesn't have a straight edge on the right-hand side. After waiting 25 years, I eventually bought it at auction for twice what George originally wanted for it. So a lesson there. But again, these shillings, mint shillings, are just extraordinarily hard to find. This I won't show in too much detail, but the postage overprint here is longer than the other 2. This is the only known horizontal setenant set, which is on a letter. And here we go with type 5. This is if you want to look for the rarest Natal stamp, probably has to be this mint. You can get it used, but mint, this is the only known example. And this, in fact, came into my collection because the Smithsonian didn't want it. So it was donated to the Smithsonian, and quite a great sale. About 20 years ago, a number of the British Commonwealth items in the donation were sold off to raise money for the museum, including this stamp. I'm not going to dwell on this. This just shows a combination of the 1869s with some other issues. This one here, if you remember, the heart sale was on the back cover of the heart sale. And this just shows the destinations, an article I wrote for the Royal, in fact, for the Cape and Natal Philatelic Journal, which I'm going to move on from. I wanted to talk about, I'll talk more perhaps tonight about this, which is the only known copy of that issue to the US, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. This issue of needing the word postage on the stamps, various overprints. These were done by De La Rue. Mostly this postage overprint is in green, which was a terrible idea to write postage in green on green. But there are a couple known in red and black. We don't know why. There might have been original printers' proofs, but they got out. They're only known used. This is actually the Royal Collection. So the keeper of the Royal Collection sold a couple of stamps out of their collection, and I acquired it there. And this one is in black, and you can't really see it that well, but it's the only known copy actually on a letter overprinted in black. Moving on, there's some beautiful stamps. These were also overprinted by De La Rue, now with vertical overprints. This would make you think that mint stamps of Natal from this period are common. Let me tell you, these are a set of 3 blocks of 9 ex-Burris. There is no other multiple known of the sixpence, not even a pair. There's a block of 4 known of the threepence, and there's a block of 4 known of the penny. So again, a set of stamps that I waited many, many years to find who had it. Besançon had it. Thank goodness the describer for the Besançon sale didn't know that this was a set ex-Burris. So they were in different sales, and they also didn't pick up that they were from Burris. So, and then I'll just show you, this is also from Burris. Burris seemed to have the only large multiples. Another type of overprinted postage, this was in the Benny Illman's collection. He actually found somewhere in South Africa, I don't know where, this printer's proof of the setting of the postage overprint. And this, it's a huge thing. It goes over 2 pages, again, unique. So to finish, I'm going to just tell you something about the combination usages with other countries. So when the Transvaal issued their stamps, so these are all Transvaal stamps, they were only valid for use in the Transvaal. If you wanted to send them out, most of the material from Transvaal has Free State and or Cape stamps on them. There's a mountain range between the Transvaal and Natal called the Drakensberg, so it was hard to send mail over the Drakensberg. There are only 18 recorded combinations of Natal and Transvaal. And I illustrate here the 3 different rates. There was a shilling rate, so there's a shilling Natal stamp. Then at the same time the shilling rate existed before 1st of August 1876, there was a ship letter rate, and you had to endorse your letter by the Curry line, which is what that says, and you could send your letter for 4p. So that's a 4p rate. And then in fact, from this date, both the ship letter rate and the contract packet rate went to 6p. So that's 2 threepence to make up a 6p rate. If you think that the combination of Natal with Transvaal is rare, try Natal with Free State. 3 known letters. These are the only 3 known combinations. The 2 at the bottom are from the same correspondence. And in each case, you've got a total of 6p Natal. These look like 6p stamps, but they're actually overprinted 1 penny. So there's a total of 6p Natal postage with a Free State stamp. Here are a couple of errors on Natal stamps. These overprints, these were overprints for a halfpenny because the rate to Germany and to Europe and to the US for that matter became 7p halfpenny, and there was no halfpenny stamp. What is particularly special about these, I don't know how good your eyes are, but this stamp and this stamp are in fact upside down. The overprint is upside down relative to the picture of the Queen. So there the Queen is the right way up, but the overprint's upside down. Here the Queen is upside down and the overprint's the right way up. Again, just 2 examples known. Those are the 2. And then there's this stamp also exists with an overprint double, and that's again the only one on a cover. Then De La Rue took over the printing of the stamps, and this is something that I discovered quite recently, that there are 2 essays. I had this one, but then the one on the right came up, and I thought, well, I don't need it. I have one already. But when I looked more closely, if you look in this corner, this essay just has sort of little bits of leaves or something, and it was then formalized into this ornate pattern, which is on this essay, and the corners were taken off. So this is based on a 6p stamp underneath here, and it's written in 4p in Chinese white over the 6p. So 2 states of this essay, which was not previously recognized. Right at the end of the time then, this is they changed some of the colors of the stamps. So the threepence went from that color to that color. Why this is particularly attractive for a philatelist is that this is a De La Rue sheet, which are, you know, well-known appendix sheets. These 3 stamps illustrated and blown up are actually perf 14, and the perf 14 doesn't exist on any Natal stamps other than these proofs. New Republic I won't dwell on because I think we're out of time, but again, like Natal, like Transvaal and Free State, there's combinations with Natal stamps. This is another interesting episode related to British Inland Mail from Madagascar. One of these, 2 of these came up on auction yesterday at Spink, if anyone was paying attention. And then I'll just say that here is a lovely thing that I was able to reunite missing postage. Turns out this is the top row of the sheet, And I'll show you what the selvage looks like. It's kind of small. It's large here on the side. So the selvage must have folded down when this overprint was done and the postage is missing. Again, there are only 2 stamps known, and they're from those 2 pairs that are reunited. And to finish the show, right at the end, there were a couple of schemes that De La Rue were interested in for future stamps. None of these were issued, but they come right at the end of the Victorian era, because after this, the Queen died and King Edward stamps took over. So I'm sorry if I've gone over too long, but that's the end of the talk. So thanks for your attention.
Couple questions. One of those shilling embossed appears to have been sent from Strawberry Hill. Is that?
No, I'd have to look and see, but there's no post office Strawberry Hill. I'd have to check which one misled someone, but no, the only cancels on the shilling embossed were from essentially Pietermaritzburg or Durban. It's not known from other locations.
Okay. And just another fundamental question. Did the postmasters have to ask permission before they overprinted the postmarks, or?
Oh yes, so this was all very official, and this came from the from the Treasury initially. So the overprints essentially only take 2 forms. One was the need to have the word postage, so that they could account for the money that was spent on postage stamps rather than revenue stamps. And then the second was these overprints for new denominations, and most of them were a halfpenny because of this rate of the 7p halfpenny that came in for Europe and the US. The UK at the time was still 6p rate. But they also did run out of penny stamps at one stage, and they overprinted some stamps with a penny, but they were all officially overprinted by permission, I would presume, from the Postmaster General.
Oh, that's it. Well, just as an aside, we have George Holshauer coming in later tonight. So unfortunately, he'll be on the plane at the time of the next talk, but I think he'll find the recording amusing.
Oh, okay.
Any questions out there? I see Ed Grabowski. Any French questions?
Oh, I'm just gasping.
Wow.
Thanks, Ed.
I have a question, if you don't mind. I'm Paul Wijnands, Belgium, calling here. Regarding to the collections, you mentioned it at the beginning. Yes. I just wondered, in 2016, I was in, and I take the catalog here, SAPDAPEC's National Exhibition in South Africa. And there I saw a collection on the sea-mails of Natal in the partly of the period you were talking about, 1837, 1876, of a certain Mr. Porter. How important is that if you compare them to the other collections? Because I was extremely surprised when I saw that exhibit on 3 frames. And I just wondered, because you just mentioned some of the big names we all know. How important is that collection regarding to early Natal?
It's a lovely collection, and indeed, it's in South Africa, and it is an important collection. There are a couple of collections. I mentioned them in that list. I could go back and go through it, but it's actually Porter collection. I think it's probably the Porter collection you're talking about. The only other specific collection of, so that's Roger Porter. He's lives in South Africa, maybe on the call, I don't know, or maybe on later on, but Roger may be actually on the call today. If he's not, there's a wonderful collection. Roger still lives in Pietermaritzburg, which used to be the capital of Natal, and he does have a very nice collection. The late John Dixon had some nice Natal material as well, also concentrating on the males, the shipping males, but unfortunately John died a couple of years ago. But no, Roger's collection, very nice collection too.
Okay, thanks.
I had a question. That postmaster who later on, when they were no longer being issued, forged the embossed stamps. Was that fraud against the post office or against the collectors?
Yeah, so good point. You know, he obviously didn't set them up as forgeries. He did say they were reprints and sold them as such. It was actually quite an interesting story because he advertised them to dealers, and I guess he wasn't really defrauding the post office because these were stamps that were long demonetized, and they weren't actually stamps. He basically created them, and but then he got a little greedy, I think, and actually wrote a letter to his superior, to his boss, asking permission to officially supply this material. And he was told to cease and desist. And so there are some clues. The actual paper, this was in 1890, was 30 years old. So the paper was actually quite brittle. And if you see an embossed stamp where the embossing actually breaks the paper, that is an indicator that it may well be a reprint. As I said, you really can't say much about a mint stamp. The used stamps, most of the original postmarks were not added to these reprints, but a couple of them are, particularly the one cancel, which was genuinely used. So that can be a little tricky if you get a one cancel on a the other thing is that, ironically, of course, as philatelists, what we look for is the best example. So what you're looking for is really beautifully embossed stamps. Well, the reality is that the reprints are 30 years younger, and they look much clearer. So to get a really clear embossed stamp, it's unfortunately more likely to be a reprint than an original, which have become very flattened over 150 years.
And I actually, the question I had was when they postmarked the letter, that you had mentioned 3 post offices that had postmarked letters.
Yes.
Was that something that they had to get permission to use, or that's something that?
Oh yes. No, that was entirely. That was. These were the three post offices originally: Ladysmith, Pietermaritzburg, and Durban. And they all had their own postmark, was just the same postmark. In Pietermaritzburg originally, for the first 3 or 4 months after the embossed stamps were used, they had what they call a mute cancel, which was a cancel that would just little dots, but it usually has the Pietermaritzburg oval next to it. In fact, in all cases, it has that as well. But that was only used for a short while, and after that, for the entire period of the embossed, there were only 3 cancellers. No, now having said that, there were manuscript cancels. So the various smaller post offices did not have postmarks, but they could cancel either with a cross, and in some instances they wrote the name of the post office on the stamp. Those are very desirable. If you can find early embossed stamps with original small town manuscript cancels. And a couple of those are known on cover. I didn't illustrate any. I have written an article about them. That's very desirable. There was a stamp came up on eBay a while ago, and it didn't sell for much because no one would have thought there's anything special about it. They probably thought it was a revenue or something because it had BMR written on it. With a big B, a little M, and a big R. And I took one look at it and thought, oh my God, that's Bushman River. And there's no other known example. And so that's, something that one looks out for.
My leg. It can go under. The electricity through the channel.
I'll remind you to put yourselves on mute if you're not talking. Judy, you have a question? Lipsy?
Yes. My question is, you've been mentioning who owns some of the material. Is provenance important otherwise?
It is, certainly there, if you can, for any area of collecting, but if you can show that that the material came out of a very well-known collection, especially if it was a particularly discerning collector. There are some collectors who were accumulators and would take virtually anything, but there were many collectors who put together great collections and only tried to buy the finest items. And if you can show that the material came from that collection, it does add value. So I actually collect, in addition to stamps, I collect catalogs and books and anything I can find which have any relevance to Natal material. There's it's very important to try and find the provenance of your material. It also, the other thing that's important is, because for early Natal, we have these reprints that float around, to know that a stamp is genuinely used on a letter, it really helps if you know which correspondences exist. And if something comes from an original correspondence, that helps make you more confident that the stamp was original to the letter, particularly if the cancel is right on the stamp and not tying it to the letter.
What was your question?
Say something.
Go ahead, Keith.
Hello, Keith. It's Keith.
The two Keiths. Hi, Keith. How are you?
It's nice to see my old friend up in your exhibit.
Oh, great.
But I think you could add a bit more class to it. So, instead of just being ex-Consul Weinberg, it ought to be ex-K Harmer. I think that would be very nice.
That'd be a better provenance, you think?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, big time, big time.
And as Larry says, that's why we have the eject key.
Oh.
Gosh, that was great fun when I opened that cover up. I mean, you think about it, it was folded up. It's in basically its entire life from the Weinberger family. And if it had ever been exhibited, that's all they would have seen is that piece of it. But it was fun working on that collection.
No, I can imagine. So the Goodrick correspondence, he was this lawyer, and I guess a lot of the material that was sent to him would have been wills or estates, and therefore, large weight. And virtually all of the multiple weight embossed letters are part of the Goodrick correspondence. I said that there are 11 known letters or large pieces with the shilling embossed stamp. And the one that's missing, which is just exists in a photograph at the Royal in the expert committee. And it got a certificate in the 1930s, and that's also to Goodrick. And it has a sixpence and a shilling, but I haven't seen it. I don't know where it is. But most of the major shilling on cover were part of this one correspondence to Goodrick.
You wouldn't happen to that Goodrick, the Goodrick. There's a college at University of York. There's a Goodrick College named after one of the. I'm not sure if it was a royalist or a royalist or not. Who involved in the Civil War? Was that is of that family?
May have been. Goodrick came to Natal as part of the Burn migration. There were a lot of people that came from the UK, but that was in 1849 to 1851. And Goodrick died in Natal. So it wasn't him, because he was very well known, became, I think, a mayor at some stage and so on in Durban. But it's certainly possible that his family came to the US. But as far as I know, Goodrick was just in Natal.
You were talking about collectors. Are there is there provenances that when you see this within this person's collection that you actually get the opposite reaction because they weren't not beyond being discerning, that maybe they ran into financial troubles and got a little bit shady about when they sold?
Yeah, I guess you have to be a little careful from some areas. In Natal, there's nothing like that that really comes to mind. So in general, it adds value. I mean, whenever I'm looking for, one of the great embossed stamps or whatever, I immediately go to Burris and look and see if it was there. Unfortunately, the illustrations were very limited. Burris was in the 60s. Much before that, you only get descriptions. But that, the cover that Keith was referring to with the block of 4 and the 9-pence, I mean, that's unique. And so you don't have to have a picture. That came up on auction a couple of times in the early part of the century. And eventually, I think, ended up at Weinberger. But there are a couple of sales. So you can trace, where that came from, but just from the description.
I see. Mike, are you in Australia, Mike White?
I'm in Thailand.
Oh, pretty early.
No, it's pretty late.
Late. Okay.
It's 10:48 p.m.
Someone's in China.
Wow. Oh.
Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Goodness me.
Dad, no questions.
Tony and Anthony, I'd like to thank all of the South African clubs for joining us. And Stephen was such a big help. I don't see him on, he'll probably be on this evening, but he was such a terrific help in getting in touch with you. I saw the collection, I got excited, and Stephen just really, and Jamie really helped put things together. But does anyone else have any other questions? You could raise your hand. We're all Natal experts now.
Good. That makes about 69 of us in the world.
David Beach. Okay.
Perhaps I have a question. David Beach here in London, ex-British Library. Mosley hasn't a second E in it, by the way. I know you're a perfectionist of detail. My question is, having formed the best collection, which must be the best collection, are you going to write the book on it, or does it already exist?
So the book doesn't exist. There's certainly, I'm certainly toying with writing a definitive book on the embossed stamps and their use, which, as you know, was a subject that I put together for the Royal. But yes, that is a limitation. There is no definitive book of the stamps and postal history of Natal. The closest that has happened was a series of articles in the London Philatelist in the 40s, which got put together in a pamphlet by Mann. And he described the layout of those 1869 overprints. But other than that, no, there is no handbook of Natal.
Do write the book. Good job, you're a young man.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
I see a lot of Cape and Natal people here. I'm assuming because I don't recognize you. And usually we have the Collectors Club toward the evening. So I think we miss a lot out on some of the people over in Europe because it's past your bedtimes. So it's very nice to see everybody. And thank you, Larry, for hosting this.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. I think we're going to draw it to a close, aren't we?
Unless there's any more questions.
Well,
I guess if someone has a burning question, they can call in later because we're going to get, my job is to make this entertaining second time round.
Oh, you will, you will. First of all, if anyone has any questions that have not been answered, pop by again at 5:30. And if you don't want to do that, if you send a question into the email address that we use for these webinars at collectorsclub.org, that's webinars, it's a plural, Collectors Club, so it's manycollectors.org. Just send the question in, we'll make sure that it gets to Keith, either from this program or later on this afternoon. And then finally, just remind everybody, we'll be processing the video, and usually within around 24 or some odd hours, we're able to post it, and it will be posted in the open. So you'll be able to see it if you're a member, not a member of anything. And if you've got friends that have an interest, we would urge you to send them our way and to take a look at the video and come on back to another program, okay?
And feel free to join the others, look at what the other societies have to offer. I mean, Natal is fascinating. I collect Nova Scotia, so it's a long way away, but it was just fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Keith, especially.
Well,
Hang on after everybody shuts down.
Keith wanted to talk to you, and
Oh, okay. I'll hang on a second.
yeah, thanks. Well, Keith, why don't you?
I see there is a note in the chat from Roger Porter, so he was actually on, so that's great.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
We brought him over. Tony and Jamie, thank you very much. It was.
Yep. Well, I don't thank me. I mean, it was Keith. It was fantastic display.
Yeah, thanks, Tony.
I'll email you my only question because
super.
It's one of those. Yeah, but it was absolutely fabulous display. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
And thank you, America, for arranging it all. Yeah.
Oh, no problem. I was just amazed at all the great material. That was.
This was Keith.
Yeah, and so was Keith.
Yeah, no, it's.
You say awe after awe after awe.
It is, it's interesting. I've had a number of collections, and I must say, very gratifying. Particularly because there's no literature, so you have to kind of do it yourself. There is, I don't know if Martin Eichler came. I don't know if you all know Martin. He actually built up a lovely collection of Natal, which I also bought. And Martin is a wonderful student. And so he, as sort of part of the deal, which is really nice, handed over to me his archival research. And that's helped with quite a bit of the provenance of